Welcome everyone. Tonight is even more evidence, actually no, scratch that. Tonight is proof that there is a growing interest by established players and new entrants by Estonian digital success stories in Canada and in North America. Welcome Ambassador Rava and distinguished guests. Tonight the work is continuing to promote Canada, to promote Estonia and the connections that we have at a business and a technology entrepreneurial level. My name is Ellen Walter. I, among other things, I'm the project lead for the construction project next door. In 2018, Andy Proses, the lead donor to that project, KESKUS International Estonian Centre, envisioned a meeting space in KESKUS for fostering business connections, a space for Estonian and Canadian entrepreneurs and investors to connect, to start new businesses, to create a beachhead in North America. And so we'll have a co-working space in KESKUS when it opens its doors in September of 2024. Then in 2019, VEMU presented Latitude 44, bringing together Estonian and Canadian tech investment communities. And now we're all agreed, okay, so we missed 2.5 years, but now we're back. And the developing of the contacts continues to deepen. A year ago, CDL launched its Tartu branch, and the first cohort is here today. One small step for CDL, one small step for the launch pad being constructed next door, and together we will continue to develop these contacts. And so tonight will be a fireside chat, and I'm delighted, first, your being here validates the important relationship as well. And there are a number of entities that are responsible for putting tonight together. So not just the Estonian Embassy in Ottawa, but also CDL, Technopol, Estonian Museum Canada, Estonian Central Council, and KESKUS all have thrown their efforts into facilitating tonight's meet and greet. Our moderator tonight for the fireside chat is Mariel Voksep. She is an experienced leader, educator, and investor whose work with technology startups spans more than a decade. She has designed and delivered numerous accelerator programs and advised leading entrepreneurial support organizations across Canada. As managing director of the Narwhal project, Mariel advises startups on obtaining capital to fund their growth. You can tell by her name that she is Estonian. Voksep means a smith of the spinning wheel, really, kind of thing. That makes a lot of sense. And in addition to being Estonian, she's also a startup coach at the University of Calgary's Hunter Hub, and she is an active angel investor. And Mariel will introduce our fireside guests.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Just before our guests introduce themselves, can we get a quick gauge of the audience? Who here is currently an entrepreneur? Show of hands. Okay. And who here is an aspiring entrepreneur? Just to help guide our discussion a little bit. So Sten, Catherine, welcome. Could you each give us a little bit of background on yourself, on your entrepreneurial journey, and why it is that you're doing what you are doing?
Okay, so hi, I'm Kat Vinson. I'm the CEO of Variant, but I am also an adjunct and almost PhD from the University of Toronto in the Department of Pharmacology. I defended in September. And so I'm quite a reluctant entrepreneur. The joke that Sean Parker, regarding Sean Parker in The Social Network kind of comes to mind historically when I've thought of the word entrepreneur, where Sean Parker is at some Stanford dorm residency, and there's a college student who's like, "What do you do for a living?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm an entrepreneur," and she goes, "Oh, so you're homeless." It's a word that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But as I was doing my PhD, I started working with rare genetic disease patients. So I don't know who in this audience knows too much about genetic testing, but just to give you a bit of background, genetic testing has become really cheap in the last couple of years. And we're learning that a lot of the common diseases out there in the world, things like Alzheimer's, epilepsy, asthma, migraines, These are all constellations of diseases that are caused by single gene mutations. And so I started working with epilepsy patients who are using, one of the 30 different FDA-approved medications to try and control their seizures. So imagine yourself in a situation where you've got intractable seizures, they're landing you in the hospital, you're trying drug after drug, off-label, trying to find something that works. And a lot of what explains the patient heterogeneity or the big differences that we see in symptoms and medication response between patients can be explained by genetics. But nobody's collecting this data. Nobody is sorting people into genetic groups and just figuring out what works for them based on crowdsourcing. And so because of that, I decided to start building what I thought was going to be a research platform. And we were going to use AI and genetic data and social listening data to not only accelerate R&D for these patients, but help them keep their symptoms under control in the interim of new therapeutic development. And a company called BenchSci, which raised scads of money from Google Ventures a few years ago, had just come out of my department, and all the professors slowly took me aside in my department, and they were like, "Kat, this isn't a research tool. Like this is a venture. This is you're wasting your time in a lab." And so we entered a pitch competition and we won it, and from there we've actually grown and launched the platform in the US. So very reluctant entrepreneur. For those of you who are investors in the audience, you will never see me serially pitching to you different ideas. This is like my one idea. I came up with it after 10 years of research, so.
And we do often hear entrepreneurs that accidentally became entrepreneurs because they were looking for a solution, and when they couldn't find it, they just decided to build it themselves. Sten?
Yeah, I'm also a reluctant entrepreneur. I finished high school and started my company. So basically, I'm a lifelong software entrepreneur. I've been building, and software is something that fits particularly well for places as tiny as Estonia is. That if you are creating something where the marginal cost of adding another million users is virtually zero, and a few people can get in the room and build something and launch it and have a million users benefit from it, that fits really, really well for small communities. So my first company in the late 90s was running on the first internet way with graphical web browsing and building websites for other people and building products to make it easier and so forth. I drove that one bankrupt after selling it. And then a few adventures later, I joined Skype very, very early. And so that was my first really globally scalable example of how you can build something that basically driving to work every morning in Tallinn, we used to have about 450,000 users a day, which happens to be a little bit more than the population of Tallinn. So you can drive to work and look outside the window, basically everybody you see on the streets, that's our users of the last 24 hours. And I was running product engineering at the scale of 330 million monthly active users, and all the fun that comes with that, building the organizations and sites and servers and keeping systems up, and every time you change something, 20 billion people who hate you. And coming out of that story, then I filled a little gap because I was a college dropout before. I went to Stanford, did my master's degree there, and then decided that, okay, I need to do another one. And I started a company called Teleport, so that in 2017, venture funded, sold it to an adjacent sort of competitor or company in the space, and stayed with the acquirer for a few years, which was also a very entrepreneurial thing. So together we acquired a few more companies, redid the platforms, and eventually in 2020, so a few years ago, I came out of that story and decided I'm going to relax and take a more of a portfolio view on life. And I had done about 45 angel investments by that time. And then I combined my activities with another fellow founder called Kati, who's built another Estonian unicorn called Wise. And so together we now manage a portfolio of about 200 tech companies we've invested in. And then we decided that we need to build a little bit more. so my main t-shirt today is a platform called Plural. Basically what we're doing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Estonian entrepreneurial ecosystem a little bit later, but basically the idea is that we need to have more founders who build companies, operated companies at scale, to back more founders in Europe to help them to create better companies. And so we're creating a pan-European mechanism to do that, which is plural.
Okay, thank you. So we say that startups are different from small businesses because a small business is executing on a business model and a startup is searching for a business model. It's a little bit jargony, but part of the entrepreneurial journey is that you're taking a solution, we call it a minimum viable product, it's a really raw solution, and you take it out to market and you start testing it with customers. And you want to hear what your customers think and if they're willing to pay money and if you're solving a pain point for them. And then what this usually translates into is insights that might be totally off the mark from the original solution that you came up with. And you have to do what we call a pivot and change a lot of the things that you've been doing. Have either of you experienced a pivot in your business?
I would say that not necessarily a pivot, but it was surprising to me how much more quickly certain aspects of our business model were going to become relevant. So our company sells services to pharma, and we were thinking with the proprietary data set that we were collecting that the AI part would come much later. But what we've learned is that the market is actually there, and maybe that's thanks to GPT and all of the wonderful things coming out of the AI companies, but the AI aspect has certainly come into play faster than we thought that it would.
Sten?
Well,
I'm sure there are many pivots, but which one is the most exciting?
I think maybe the most interesting one was the pivot that we were, so basically my last company in Teleport, we were building software for people to figure out where in the world they should live and work. So with increasing remote work, people being able to do what they do anywhere, and at the same time there are certain places that pull more talent and people are constantly making location decisions and then decisions about how to get there. And so we started a company, funded it to build a consumer product. So we figured that, okay, like if a very large commercial bank moves you from Hong Kong to Toronto, then probably they will provide you services. But if you're an individual, a PhD student from Toronto needing to move to Tallinn, then you probably are on your own. And so we're trying hard to build products for that segment, and that still leaves a gap, that market doesn't exist still. And we missed with the business model, so it was impossible. We couldn't figure out how we can make these people pay, because individuals moving around sleep on their friend's couch and buy the cheapest airline tickets as opposed to corporate relocation people. And because of that, we at some point, like 18 months, 24 months in, we decided that we need to shift to the business market. So sell to companies moving their employees rather than sell to individuals. And that pivot resulted in us selling the company. Because like when you have like a year of runway left, and then you see, okay, all these things that you need to build up, the sales organization and sort of the positioning for the new market and all of that, it became easier to partner up with somebody who already does that well. And in our case, partnering up meant that their board came like 3 months later and said, what are we fooling around? Let's just put these two things together. And so it was like a very I've had pivots before which are more like stay internal, but this pivot was interesting because it actually changed the company to a point of actually being 100% owned by other people. So it's like quite a big pivot.
Yeah. So pivot can be in the business model, it can be in the market, the customer that you're serving, or it could be in the solution itself, completely changing the solution. And when I was working at Mars Discovery District, we worked with a number of early stage technology startups. And one of them was called BitStrips. I don't know if there are any teachers in the audience that know BitStrips. It was a computer comic book, and teachers used it to do, is nodding her head. They used it to teach, I used it when I was a teacher to teach French. And the students would go onto the computer and create these comics and in their French class. But we were working with this company and they couldn't make money. The customer was not able to pay them. The sales cycle in the school board was challenging, and so they actually pivoted into Bitmoji.
Whoa.
So you can change the product completely, and now look at where they are. So for the last decade, maybe more, we've seen an era that we called easy money. And the last year has really turned that upside down. We had lots of venture funding available, sky-high valuations, and looking at companies that had exponential revenue growth. So even if they were operating at a massive loss, if they were growing and they had this big hockey stick forecast, that was a positive. That's what investors wanted to see. This has all changed. So Catherine, you raised money in the last year. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like and what the challenges were that you were facing?
So we raised money in January of 2022, and
the worst time.
Well, no, it was, yeah. So our investors approached us. They wrote me an email and they were like, we want to invest and blah, 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 blah. And it was just this like magical fantasy situation where, 1 week we had a conversation and the next week a check was cut. And at the time, it was very nice to be a hot commodity because I had a bunch of different investors in my email inbox. And it seemed so hot that our investors were like, okay, well, why don't you poke a little bit and see if you're going to raise a large round about 6 months later. So I went back to all the investors that I'd previously been unable to get to stop talking to me, and they were all like just dead. Like the whole market was dead. Suddenly the interest had completely waned, and things have definitely changed now. And you have to be a lot more comfortable with discomfort in your bank account. Pivoting to angels, I think, has definitely been very helpful for us. Just as we've kept going and seek to reach our next big milestones before we even think about raising money.
Yeah, and what we've seen at the Narwhal Project with the companies that we've been raising money for over the last year is that investors are looking for a lot more runway, so a lot more money and resources that are available before companies go out and raise money. And we've been focusing more on non-dilutive financing, so debt and accessing grants, and just really building a strong foundation for the company where they're reinvesting their revenues into the operations to grow the business. And Stan, from an investor perspective, what are you seeing and what is your advice for any of the companies that are currently raising or raising in the near future?
I think the main visible change, and starting from the good side, is that time has slowed down. And what I mean by that is that 2021, a typical day in the life of an investor was that, hey, there is this company raising their round, it's Thursday, the round is going to close on Monday, and you get 30 minutes with the founder on Saturday, please decide. And today, we're back in the world where there's an actual conversation and getting to know the people and understanding their plans and discussing their weaknesses and seeing sort of what are you that you can provide besides money and to actually make it happen. And if you're the right investor, or is there another investor that you can call in and like all of these things. And that is a very, very healthy change, and I think avoids a lot of this sort of deep FOMO situations and people rushing to the latest hottest thing, and actually people getting better matched with better investor quality, investor and founder partnership quality, I think is better. The flip side of that is that in that equation, when time slows down, entrepreneurs' clock is ticking way louder. Like you have a bank account that is running empty with every week and every paycheck and like all of that, whereas for an investor, the money that is already in the venture fund doesn't disappear in 3 months, but the company might. And so that sort of discrepancy or that sort of change in pace is what makes this relationship very, that's the unhealthy side of it, because one side is having an anxiety attack and the other side is, like nothing really happens if we continue in September. Like, so I want to see this other number, I want to see this other thing happen, I want to see this other proof point and all of that. And so, but that can't go on forever. I think good companies are getting funded today. They were funded 2 years ago, they will be funded next year. There is no lack of capital from the market, but it's pickier and it's slower. And I think the healthy thing is for the founder is to sort of reduce the noise of the ticking clock. Like if you can raise non-dilutive equity or use some grants, get some debt in quicker instead of doing a big round, becoming profitable, this good old thing. Not too bad one actually. So whatever you can pull off to sort of extend your runway so that you can go through this sort of carefully orchestrated dance for a few moments.
Yeah, that's great advice. We have, unfortunately, I don't know what it looks like in Estonia, but here locally, we have a pretty big gap at the angel stage. So that's not a good situation for our companies right now. But again, building a strong foundation and becoming profitable is a really positive way to plan your business for the time being. So Kath, you've been at the University of Toronto for 6 years. The University of Toronto is a central startup hub here. They have, I think, 13 or 14 incubator or accelerator programs in different streams and stages. So I know that you won a pitch competition through the University of Toronto. Can you talk a little bit about what their resources are like, or if you've tapped into any other resources in the Toronto ecosystem?
So we won a pitch competition through U of T, and they gave us a grant, which was great. That is helpful, non-dilutive funding. It got us on a few investors' radar. It essentially, it served as the accelerator for us raising our first round. So that was really, really helpful. I would say that if you have a PhD from U of T, which I technically don't yet, you're in a much better position to ask the university for more funding thereafter. Or if you go through their technology transfer program, then they are more likely to give you some resources, which we did not have to do. So those things are really great for those of you in the U of T ecosystem. I would also just say that the Toronto network is wonderful. It's a global city. There are a lot of really wonderful local business persons, venture capitalists, academics in the space that you'll be operating in. We're so close to everything. It's an hour and a half flight to Boston, and so I would just say the location and the city of Toronto have also been great in growing the network and the business.
And outside of the university, there are also a lot of accelerator and incubator programs. CDL, the Creative Destruction Lab, who is here tonight, Estonia's first cohort, right? Correct? CDL is a program that was launched out of the University of Toronto in 2012 by Professor AJ Agarwal. He was a professor of entrepreneurial management, and we actually worked with him at Mars. He used to present in the program that I ran there. And he saw a big gap in the ecosystem for objective-based mentorship. So there's this theory that comes out of Stanford University, Lean Startup, some of you may have heard of, that a startup goes through certain phases in its life cycle, and these are predictable phases. And if you are able to structure resources to them at each of these stages, you can help to move them along faster, and that's why we call it acceleration. And these programs are called accelerators. So they put a lot of resources towards them, and they put time constraints around them, and they hope that they can push them through faster. I also wanted to go back to non-dilutive financing, in case that was a word that people weren't familiar with. When you have dilutive financing, you're giving away a part of your company. You're giving away equity when you're raising money, and non-dilutive is not giving away a part of your company, just in case anybody was wondering. So CDL. Why CDL, Stan? Why was that a program that you looked at partnering with in Estonia?
Yeah, and maybe this is actually a good spot to cover this story, but I'm also, besides being an entrepreneur, I'm also on the board of an organization called the VEMU, the Freedom Museum in Estonia. And VEMU was started by a Kiilaspea family and of Estonian immigrants who felt that they need to give back to Estonia for the cause of never again. And they opened the Museum of Occupation now 20 years ago. And so VEMU is an iteration on that topic, and it's very interesting that, I hope this is a surprisingly long-winded answer, but if you think of how you talk about occupations and lack of freedom to people who have experienced the Soviet occupation or Nazi occupation or being kicked out of the country, then this is a certain kind of storytelling that you can do. You're bringing back memories. If you're talking about freedom to people who have never experienced the lack of freedom, which is the Estonian youth today, like people who have been born in the last 35 years, then you don't have personal memories and you need to have more stories that relate to that. And one very important freedom, and so VEMU is all about presenting the value of freedoms to contrast occupations to the lack of those freedoms, is a freedom of entrepreneurship, the freedom to create something out of nothing, the freedom of speech, the freedom, all the freedoms that we value. And in VEMU, we started thinking about, okay, what are the things that we can do that click into the modern Estonian society, tie us closer and closer into international networks, ensure that these freedoms exist and give people the tools to exercise and practice these freedoms, like creating companies, for example. And as part of all this sort of outreach of getting out of this sort of physical museum of occupations and getting broader into society, we identified Creative Destruction Lab, or CDL, as one of those programs. So Estonia has like a bustling startup scene. We have more unicorns per capita than anywhere in the world. It's like Israel, Estonia, Bay Area, around San Francisco, 3 places. The last is not the country. We have 1,400 teams building. The venture funding of early stage companies last year was $1.2 billion going into Estonian companies. 15 years ago, there was 6 million a year. So we're going through this massive wave, and so it's not that we are bringing CDL to Estonia to teach Estonians how to build companies, but it's making sure that the best teams around the world building for digital society applications have a reason and a way how to come to Estonia and build in Estonia, how to have all this international network of mentors from Toronto and Oxford and all the other places where CDL is present to come to Estonia, have these wonderful Estonian entrepreneurs in this cohort and in the future ones to come to Toronto, go to these other sites and talk to investors and sort of basically network everything up in a way that everybody sees where the global bar is and keep raising the bar. And behind that, there's this little hack that, okay, the more friends of Estonia we have around the world, the more impact and the more network Estonian companies are, the less likely is that that shit will happen ever again. So it's a little bit of a philosophically minded, but at the same time very practical, I think, step. And I think Andrew Thompson here in the audience gets a lot of credit to connecting the dots on the VEMU side and Kiilaspea Foundation side. So thank you, Andy. And it's something where CDL is just also extremely well done and executed. I think I've seen many acceleration and incubation programs. I keep telling people that it's the most respectful program for the entrepreneurs and mentors' time. And if you respect people's time, if you pack a lot of content into an 8-hour session, an 8-week break between the sessions and all this very structured, very fast executed thing, when you respect people's time, then you get a lot of commitment from great founders applying for the program and great mentors actually willing to show up.
And then that has a positive effect going forward.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say one thing, which is that if you haven't been through CDL, at least the CDL mentors and folks in Toronto, they're extremely friendly. So if you are an aspiring entrepreneur, do use them as a resource. You know, they're really smart folks and they're really friendly folks.
Yeah, they're there for the right reasons. They want to see startups succeed. So you talked a little bit about Estonia and unicorns. At the Normal Project, we conduct research to understand what factors contribute to building world-class companies. And one of the issues that we've been looking at is why is Canada falling behind? So, Steph, can you talk to us a little bit about what you think is the secret sauce in Estonia's ecosystem to producing these unicorns, most unicorns per capita in the world, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a few things. So first of all, one thing that I touched upon earlier is this, I think it's super interesting to think about the ratio of person hours put into something versus the value generated to the world. And if you come from a small place where anything you start, you always lack people. Like you cannot start a project by slapping a 40-person free-layer Prince 2 certified project management organization on top, but you have like two girls in the room thinking, okay, how do we get it done in 2 weeks? And which in the early 90s might have looked as a deficiency, but actually it's building a startup. So it's like very culturally very fit for sort of small, nimble companies coming from small middle places. Secondly, there is a very high regard and very high quality of real sciences education. And while a startup game is a very multidisciplinary game, like in order to build magic, you would need to have a great engineer and a great designer and somebody with empathy for the users and somebody with an actor building out the business plan. Like these people need to collaborate. But this will usually, in high-tech growth companies, it will not work if one of those corners doesn't know math. And so having a pool of that set of people, I think, is crucial. There is also, I think, the fact that Estonia is so small means that you cannot start anything for the internal market. Like if you're ambitious to build a big company, you cannot build an Estonian product. And Canada is a little bit larger, but like if I look at entrepreneurs from Germany or France, they always build for the local market first and then go global later. We go global day one. And if everybody goes global, then you have this sort of phenomenon where you have, like the mental image that I have about the Estonian founders is that you have a tight little community where everybody's looking at the wide world, which visually means that everybody's backs are together. So it creates this sort of super tight community of founders that are very helpful to each other, work together, and they do all these things. Because they're not really competing on anything besides talent. But talent fund stuff you can fix. So we created a startup visa. You can hire somebody on Friday, have to work on Monday from anywhere in the world. It's beautiful. And so you can sort of figure out these things that are lacking and actually turn these things that you have into your benefits. And in our case, we've turned sort of real sciences education, small location, small sort of or lack of internal market, these things that look like a think that, oh, that should block you from building great companies. No, that's the enabler.
Yeah, thank you. So we're starting to wrap up this part of the discussion. Catherine, do you have any words of wisdom for the entrepreneurs in the audience, for the potentially aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience?
I would say that I read an article, I think early this year, that talked about the era of the cockroach when it comes to startup founders. And I think that that's very true, and to lean into it, like you gotta be a cockroach. And the other thing is that I was talking to an Estonian VC actually a couple weeks ago, and you know we were circling around some terms, and he was like, you know, it's not ideal, but great founders find a way to make it work. And that has played in my head every single day since we had that discussion, because it's so true. You must be resourceful, and you're gonna get mentors who say frustrating things to you like, oh, you'll just find a way to make it work, and you'll just wanna like smack them, but they're right. So find a way to make it work.
And the investors that I work with will unanimously say they are not investing in the idea, they are investing in the founder, because they want to see a person that's going to make it work no matter what happens, because the product that you're bringing them today may not be what it is in 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So they want to see that you have the drive and the ambition and the resilience to make it happen no matter what. Sten?
I think my main word of wisdom, can the CDL companies raise a hand? So my main word of wisdom is that when this session ends, find one of those people and talk about what does it mean to actually build a startup. Very good, thank you very much.
We also want to take an opportunity to have the audience ask questions if anybody is interested. And then do we have another microphone? Oh, okay, just stand up and use your outdoor voice.
I've never had a problem with being quiet. So, I'm Barry Kirk with Cavco. What you guys have been saying is wonderful, but I'd like to, it's not a question, but I'm going to say something and ask for your opinion. I would suggest we broaden the scope of all of this, make it Canada-wide. A lot of what I've been hearing has been very Toronto-focused, and Estonia, of course. But there's a lot of other things happening in other parts of the country. There's a wonderful ecosystem here, no doubt about it. There's other ecosystems in other parts of the country. In my own area, which is self-driving cars, there's ecosystems in Ottawa, Toronto, Kitchener-Waterloo, Windsor, if you include electric cars, Vancouver. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for synergy there between Estonia and these other ecosystems across the country, in addition to Toronto. What do you think?
I absolutely agree, and we did focus more on Toronto today, but thank you for sharing. I mean, I think one thing that Canada needs is a way to connect all of these ecosystems. I think that's one of our challenges here, but it's true. There are, I mean, I work with the University of Calgary. They are up and coming as a tech leader now. They're really focused on innovation there. Lots of money going into innovation and turning around their economy into a green economy. So there are other hubs and centers, and some of them are connected. CDL has sites across Canada as well. So don't limit yourself just to Toronto. There are other ecosystems, and you might find the niche that you're looking for, the sector that you're working in, has better resources in another area of Canada. Do you know, is there like a place, a website, does the federal government have like a map of all of these ecosystems to make it easy?
Not for everything. I think there are different maps for different industries. I know in my own industry of self-driving vehicles, it's easy to have a map of who's doing what across the country, but you've got other maps of ecosystems in precision agriculture, precision health, which are separate, but nobody has tried to amalgamate all of that.
There is the Canadian Venture Capital Association puts out a report every year of the different funders, and they are organized by sector. So you could also look at that and then work backwards, or you could reach out to them and to try to understand where your sector focus might be and where the best resources are. Thank you. Anybody else?
I was quite fascinated by your comment on an entrepreneur needs to be a cockroach, so could you explain that?
Yeah, tenacious, resourceful, able to thrive in any environment, refusing to die, that kind of thing. But it's, I think, you could Google the era of the startup, the cockroach startup, or the cockroach founder, and I think they put it more eloquently than me, maybe.
I think it's pretty effective. Yes.
Actually, a lot of this was covered in a way, but I'm interested in following one of the threads in this discussion, which is the idea of critical mass in innovation. There's the old legendary story: two guys it's always guys, get together at a diner in Silicon Valley and have breakfast and invent a new company. And it's because people come together, they're in the same area, they're cross-disciplinary and all the rest. And this is probably a great example of an attempt at that. Sorry, I'm not going to say attempt because I don't mean to downplay it. Estonia has had a certain amount of that concentration. Canada has these concentrations, as was just brought out, in certain geographic areas. But as we move to a world where people are more dispersed, and we're making people work from greater distances, but are we making them connect with ideas from greater distances? Are there ideas or thoughts to bringing talent together in a way that they bump into each other and discover new things that can be turned into something?
It might come out a little bit controversial, but at some level nation states don't matter when it comes to innovation. Like, nobody cares if Canada has like a very tight network between the cities. The world will notice when Canada produces amazing innovations, and it's kind of like already like the intricacies of which people were in which city usually get lost. The other flip side of that is that if you pick any 25-year-old person, they will never say that I moved to Canada, I moved to America, United States of America, or I moved to Germany. They moved to Toronto or San Francisco or Berlin. And so there is like the importance of smaller, tighter communities and hubs for something. Like, if you want to become a fashion designer, you're probably going to move to Milan or Paris and not Toronto. I don't know, maybe. But like there are things where there are sort of the centers that pull people and pull talent, that pull ideas, become more defined, more narrow, or more smaller, and then there's collaboration between them. For example, capital flows between them, or these places go after markets. So So in that sense, I'm not sure if for a larger country, especially with vast geographic distances like Canada, like the goal of having an extremely inter-networked internal market is the main thing that matters. I would way more focus on what are the places that are really, really the best in the world about something, and making sure you have a few of those. It's like, that's the other thing that I completely hate, and I'm so grateful that the Estonian government has not gone that far. There's so many countries and governments around the world that say that we're going to create the Silicon Valley of X. Silicon Valley of the North, Silicon Valley of the South, Silicon Valley of that lake, and Silicon Valley of that sea, and Silicon Valley of something, something, something. That is so wrong. You know why? Like, the basic definition of a startup is that you can only break through and you can only be better than the incumbents if your product is 10 times better than the incumbent. If you define yourself through, I'm going to be a smaller, weaker, simpler version of the incumbent, like you're never going to win anything. Like at best, you're going to be like 10% better in being in the South. That's stupid. And so the entire sort of starting point of any of this is that what is the thing where you're 10x better than any place in the world to build something? Like maybe it's biotech, maybe it's in Estonia, the CDL track is called digital society, because nowhere in the world has anybody actually built the system where 92% of citizens sign everything digitally. Like Estonia, we save 2% of GDP per year from signing everything digitally and skipping paper. 2% is what we spend on defense so that Russia doesn't walk in. It's kind of, that comes from digital signatures. Like this is the life we've lived, and we've lived that for 25 years. So it's all in the law, it's all in technology, it's all in actual use. So if anybody wants to build a digital society interfacing startup, like why would they try to build it in the US, for example? Have you been to DMV? Like, I mean, there's some of this stuff is so obvious that when there is a big tech hub has a weakness, like that's your opportunity. It's like this sort of Amazon thing. Somebody else's margin is my opportunity.
Yeah, we say to our entrepreneurs, it's better to be second to market. Because then you've had someone else pave the way, they've had to disrupt the market, and then you just come in and you do it a little bit better, or a lot better, but you can easily surpass them. There's also, there is an interesting organization called the Startup Genome that publishes reports and does research on the life cycle of ecosystems in a lot of these cities that Sten has mentioned. And it looks at all of the different factors required to make a successful startup ecosystem, and there are various stages. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head. And there are hubs and cities that are better at certain things. So that's a really good resource to Startup Genome. They've been doing this research for more than 10 years, I think. Any more questions from the audience?
So I think we can all agree that the Canadian governments at all levels of government can do a lot more. And my background actually with the Estonian community started when Latitude 44 was being organized. I was the lead from the Office of the Premier of Ontario. And I've noticed back then that Estonians are very resourceful, and as a country, I agree with you. But I think what the government is always lacking is one active voice, one concerted voice from the community, from CDL, maybe from a group of startups, to actually notice it and start to act. Would you agree to that? And is anything being done for advocacy and for government relations from the Estonian community?
Do you mean the government here?
Yeah, at all levels, just to actually make them give more resources.
Ellen, do you want to take this?
I know there are a bunch of not related to KESKUS. There are a bunch of controversial committees that keep popping up, and led by Jim Valsilli and various others that are trying to address this. But I think they end up just fighting with each other. That didn't go on camera, right?
I don't know that I can answer the question. The future looks quite promising with the project next door. That will be a contemporary hub for Estonian activity, including business and technology. And with that, when it opens in September of next year, will come a greater weight or physical presence that will allow for a more concerted voice to represent the community here. That would be my best answer, because we have been going at it, like I said in my opening, in fits and starts with Latitude 44 and other such events that, and we've been having a Business Accelerator Advisory Group that's been meeting fairly regularly. The future looks bright, and we're just making our way there, I think, is the answer. If there's anything else.
We got last call for questions from the audience. So Ellen, I'm going to hand you back the mic to wrap up.
Thank you so very much, Sten, Kath, and Marielle for leading us through this fireside chat. We have the next phase of our evening tonight will be taking care of, actually, for those who don't read Estonian, everyone plugs their thing by way of t-shirt. So my t-shirt has hashtag iga viies eestlane elab välismaal. 1 in 5 Estonians lives abroad. So we were very, very lucky to start. You were saying everyone needs to know a little bit of math. Well, in this room, that number is a very different number. And Toronto was very lucky when Marika Merirand, who is the representative of Tallinn's, from Tehnopol, Tallinn's Science Park, moved to Canada in 2020, early in 2020. Indeed, she started remote work before all the rest of us did, by 2 weeks. So Marika has been in Toronto since that time and is a coup for Toronto. And Marika will talk us through the next part of this evening.
I will not be long with you. So like our good panelists said and echoed in some of your questions or comments, I also strongly believe that we're all good in what we do. We all have great ideas, but it's only viable if you talk to people. So please now take the opportunity, find somebody you don't know, talk to them, ask questions. I will give you some keywords. And when you leave at the door, we will test you. Okay.
We should do a speed dating. Give everybody numbers.
I'm gonna start by giving keywords describing the Estonian companies. So if you feel this is something that talks to you, then Ermo, can you raise your hand? Will help you connect with the Estonian companies. So we're talking about electrical vehicles, automated contract management, 3D cameras for smart machines, compliance in clinical trials, sustainable forest management, scanner and tomography solutions, and innovative solutions in wound care. So if this is something that you're interested in, Emma will help you find that contact. Also from the Canadian side, we have a lot of people sign up. I'll give you some keywords. I hope they all made it here. So we have people associated with U of T, York University, McMaster, and University of Waterloo. There are people in technology transfer, business planning, project management for startups, customer management, so a variety of business competences, automated vehicles, smart buildings, electronics design, biotech. So if there's for the Estonian companies, if you have any questions or you have a specific contact wish, you can come to me, Ellen, and Lina, and we will try to set up that contact for you.
And there's wine and nibbles.
And there's wine and nibbles to help you network. So thank you, and please go talk to each other.